Okay, we should be set.
All righty, thank you. All right, I am going to call the City of Moab Special City Council workshops on Tuesday, January 18th at 5:30 p.m. to order at 5:34. The purpose of this meeting is to discuss hotspot funding and dispersed parking program in downtown Moab. And I'm just going to go ahead and turn this over to Chuck to introduce the folks that will be making the presentation, and we'll just get going.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. I appreciate you taking the time for this special meeting. We've got our consultant team together here, and we've got a presentation and an agenda we'd like to follow. If that's okay with you, we'll just go right into that. And we've got certainly have time at the end. We want your feedback from council. That's one of the primary purposes of this meeting. But I'd like to kind of give I don't want to call you the old council, but the previous council, an update on where we're at, and the new council members and mayor kind of give you some more information than you might have had in the past. So with that, Cody, if you pull up slide 1, please.
Yep. Can everybody see that all right?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay.
So this is a project that has been going on, the hotspot funding since 2017, where the legislature made $110 million available to communities, resort communities, essentially, with certain specific needs. Some legislative funding available. We were in the Arches region, and we received approximately $10 million originally for a couple of projects. It's morphed over time, and where we're at now is an agreement I'll go into here in a moment to let you know what happened. And actually, maybe Cody, let's look at the agreement to just then I'll come back. A little bit bigger, please, if you can. So this was an agreement that it's a UDOT agreement that council signed back in November, I believe. We can look, but there were some specifics to this agreement whereby UDOT is managing the project for the legislature the same way cities, we've been managing this project for the council. Some specifics of the work is we're going to add 188 parking stalls on 10 streets. And the reason that parking was awarded by UDOT is that this is one of the primary means of relieving traffic congestion for people driving around looking for parking spaces over and over because there's a lack of them in the downtown. Another key element of this is typically UDOT will only allow 3% of their projects to be funded for what they call aesthetics. And we'll talk about what those are, but essentially it's landscaping and other treatments that go beyond pure engineering functions such as asphalt and lights. So, but we were able to negotiate with them to get up to 6% funding, and they worked on that with us. And then the other thing that I would point out that in the next paragraph, it says, once this agreement is finalized, it is critical that this project be completed. If the local agency should decide to terminate the agreement, it will reimburse UDOT for all costs incurred for the work. And we all knew that. We talked about that multiple times at council, but just as a reminder, so my marching orders have been get this done, and we're making progress doing so since this contract was signed. If you'll pull back out now, Cody. So what we did once this contract was signed, we selected Civil Science Incorporated, who's one of our on-call consultants and who had worked with UDOT during the hotspot funding and has worked with us on other designs downtown to put together a project team. And Cody will talk about that in a moment. Cody's the project manager for Civil Science. But that's why they're involved in this call right now, is we're actually engaged in doing the work. Our purpose, I guess I'll fall over to this now, is we're going to give you an overview and the constraints of the project, and then we hope to receive input from council regarding the aesthetics. And one of the things is that if you look there under funding constraints, we're allowed to spend up to $342,900, which represents 6% of the total $5,715,000 budget for aesthetic treatments. The remainder of that money, then we have cost estimates. I'll show you here in a moment quickly. That break out what are potentially aesthetic treatments and break out which are functional portions of the project. Overall, our project goals and objectives are to improve the streets, to gain parking in the downtown area. That'll, contribute to a thriving city core, to accommodate locals and visitors, and demonstrate some sustainability processes. So, a quick overview of work done to date, if you would please, Cody. On the lower right, the work that we did, the concept design. Yeah. So can you just go to the top of that page if you have it? Do you have the whole doc? Or just that?
Sorry, Chuck, my computer's being a little slow.
Sorry.
It's wanting to come over. There we go.
Yeah, so city staff during the dark year when we were all shut down, we developed this document, the engineering department, working with the Recreation Hotspot Committee, which was composed of 3 council members, some Grand County council members, and some local business folks. And if you go to the top again, Cody,
Yep.
If you can. Yeah, we ended up with 9 streets and treatments on these streets, which include Center Street, 300 South, 100 North, and 200 North, and then some restriping on 100 East on various blocks. And what those, now if you'll go down, Cody, please. There's a typical one. I won't go through every one of these, but essentially that's a good one to stop at.
Okay.
With what this has is, you can see that we have in the upside, we've got striping. We're restriping some areas that currently have parallel parking into additional diagonal parking, because you get more parking per linear foot of street using diagonal parking than you do using parallel parking. And then if you look down on Center Street, you see that we'll be installing median parking. So essentially the street becomes a one-way street on either side of the median parking, but it's median parking in the middle, and then there'll be parallel parking on the curb sides. And of course, Moab, as you know, has been developing since 1905. So while we have 100 feet of right-of-way in most places, there are encroachments into that right-of-way, where this is an example where the building at the intersection up there, the face of the building is at the edge of the right-of-way. So we're really not able to do any work there effectively. And shown also in these schematics are water lines in blue, sewer lines in green, and the yellow represent parcel lines. So we tried to do this cognizant of utilities, knowing that there are underground mysteries throughout our city. And at the same time, those underground utilities are functional and active, and we'll have to be cognizant of them on in terms of any potential landscaping that we do, because we can't have root structures affecting some of our utilities. And if you go down to Cody, please scroll through there. You might find that typical detail. The last one I want to show, not that one. Keep going. Keep going. There's nope, I'm not seeing it. Okay, that's fine.
Yep.
It's just the detail that where we had actually placed utilities underground. Okay, if we can go back to the presentation, please. But this is work that was done. We developed cost estimates, and this is the work that was presented to the UDOT Transportation Commission, I guess is the reason I wanted you to see this. It was concept level. Civil Sciences team is going to take it to design level and produce bid documents that we can then go out and have this constructed. So that's the 9 streets downtown. If you'll show Emma, please, Cody.
Yep. that work, or do you want to see the PDF, Chuck?
No, that's good.
Okay.
And so this is, if you can point out, Cody, Emma Boulevard. I don't know if your cursor, yeah, that's Emma Boulevard. And if you go up to the top right where it says Minnie Lee Avenue, that's where the new Hawk intersection that was constructed as part of the 191 widening project by the Rock Shop, that comes across. And that's our shared use path that is complete now all the way down, then crosses at Swanee Park and goes down to the Parkway. This alignment will take what's Emma Boulevard right of way was negotiated over this last 5 years. And we now have, council gave direction that we would only have one-way access off of Highway 191 up on Minnie Lee, so that you could come off of the highway but not use it as a through street from the school to the highway, was I think most of the reasoning. So then as you come down Minnie Lee, go into that little parking lot up there, Cody, we'll pick up like 16 to 19 spaces there. And then on the left, on the green, will be a green infrastructure side that'll take care of detention and what other aesthetics amenities we may be able to put in there. We've talked about gardens, et cetera, and that's to be determined as part of this project. And then Emma will continue one way down to Maxine, and then we'll be putting some spaces on Maxine, and then Emma Boulevard will then continue down and go into a two-way street. And the city, UDOT would not pay for the paving of the street here. So the city has committed and budgeted this year money to do that in concert with some of the funding. But we pick up 44 of those 188 spaces. We pick up 44 of them here on this Emma Boulevard area, Minnie Lee. So with that kind of an overview of project history, why we're doing what we're doing, where we think we're going, if you can zoom out, Cody, back to this overall slide. I'd like to turn it over to Cody and his team and let them talk in, at a high level about some of the treatments and activities we can see happening in the near future and further future, and then be happy to answer any questions we can at all. We'd love to have council feedback tonight. So with that, Cody Howick's our project manager from Civil Science.
Hey, appreciate it, Chuck. Thanks. And we appreciate the opportunity to do this important project for the city. We're excited about it. Just quickly, we want to maybe be done around 6:20 so that we can open it up for discussion. That's really why we're here, is to hear what you guys have to say and get your thoughts. But we wanted to give you a little input first of what's been done. Right now, there has been not a lot of design done when it comes to construction documents. A lot of we've completed the base mapping. You might have seen some of our survey crews out there in the last few weeks. We're processing that information, and soon we're going to start kind of on the design documents, and that's why we wanted to hold this meeting first. So kind of to introduce the team here, I've got Jeff Pay with Civil Science. He's kind of assisting me on the project management side. He also just recently came from St. George City over here and has been involved with a lot of city work over the past, 20 years, Jeff. So I also have Ann Christensen on here with DHM Design. They're going to be our landscape architecture leads on this to make sure we get the look and feel that Moab wants on this. I've got David Roeder with Clanton Associates. He's going to talk a little bit about electrical and lighting for the project. He's our electrical engineer. And then I also have Leah Jaramillo with David Evans and Associates. She's going to be our public involvement lead and help with public meetings for this project. So that's our team. I'm going to talk just a little bit about a little bit about the engineering behind this. Again, we haven't gone too far down the road, but I want to throw out there some considerations as we're trying to make decisions on aesthetics. A lot of times the engineering behind it governs. So a few things just to consider as we move down here are, number one, bike lanes. How do we share the road and this parking with biking? That needs to be thought through. I don't think we have a solution yet, but there's some options there with using sharrows, as you see in that upper right-hand corner. And then obviously bike lanes, that's what you kind of see on 100 West already. And so that's something to consider as we're laying these things out. Another thing to consider are the parking requirements. Obviously, as Chuck said, they've done a lot of work, the city staff has, before on, what size of vehicles can we accommodate? What size of vehicles do we want to accommodate? And you can see the difference between, a minivan, a smaller compact car, and then, your trucks, F-150, and it goes up from there, as you know. So gives you an idea. We're set with some typical dimensions on that with parking stalls we lay out and parallel parking stalls. So just things to consider there. As Chuck mentioned before as well, utilities are a big deal. We don't want to be putting all these new improvements on a bunch of existing utilities and have to tear it up down the road, or vice versa. So it's important we get those mapped and we plan for those utilities where they're at. And then lastly, something to consider is as you approach these intersections, there's turning movements vehicles have to make, and we got to make this safe from a vehicle and a pedestrian standpoint. So turning lanes will be important to consider. And then also, I put on here pavement. If this is kind of a Google Earth shot of the existing pavement out there, you can kind of see that probably doesn't look like the best pavement right now. But that's something to consider as we put these improvements in. Is there things we want to do with the pavement? So we'll work through all those issues as we move forward with the design. But those are some engineering and technical considerations I think just need to be brought before the council. So with that being said, I'm going to turn the time over to Ann. She's going to talk aesthetics, which is really why we're here.
Great. Okay, you can go ahead and zoom in on advance it to the complete streets section.
Okay.
So when we talk about complete streets, and especially looking at these projects where we're improving these sort of wide side streets to include the parking, what we really care about is making them safe and usable for a wide range of users, especially pedestrians, because there'll be a lot of people just moving in and out of the parking area. And so visibility is really key, and making it attractive and more pedestrian scale will help with traffic calming. And it'll also just help contribute to a more vibrant downtown, having a little bit more visual interest for that. And so in this cross section below, we're just looking at some of the different kind of typical components that contribute to a complete street. So if you advance to the next slide, Cody, it's about accommodating sidewalks that serve those adjacent businesses, having enough space to between vehicles and pedestrian ways, pedestrian refuges. That's where we have a median in this situation where you cross. It's just designing that to be a safe spot where you split up that crossing the streetway. And then there's some residual space within streetscapes that it's not really part of the functional drive lanes, and you can take that over kind of for more pedestrian emphasis. And bulb outs is one of those, where on the corners there may be an opportunity to bring the sidewalk out farther and create a little bit of separation, so that becomes part of the pedestrian streetscape. And then in Emma Street, we really have an opportunity to filter stormwater and those stormwater elements. And then there's the attractive quality of some of the furnishings and landscaping elements as well. And then just making sure that things are sized properly. This is back to engineering, but like making sure that, like, if we're gonna have tour buses or larger kind of transit type vehicles coming through, that they can safely move through the area. And it might affect kind of how we handle some curbs and ends to medians and things like that. And then in accessibility, just making that not just for wheelchairs, but for all kinds of users and strollers and that kind of thing. So on to the next slide. Traffic calming is a big part of this. So by creating this sort of higher level of pedestrian detail and interest, it helps reduce the speed of cars coming through and aiming for a narrower kind of drive lane. Right now, a lot of the western towns across Utah and Colorado and Arizona have really wide streets, and then that creates this sort of sense that you can go faster because there's just nothing sort of making you cautious about slowing down. So just by kind of filling in that sort of wider area with all these improvements in the parking, it'll create a sort of safer pedestrian scale and environment. Okay. And so our goal here is just to have more of that safe, thriving environment for everybody. So keep going.
Move to design now, Ann?
Sure. And so the fun part when we do get into aesthetics, there will meet the requirements as far as these kind of standard components that UDOT supports. And there's an opportunity for us to work with you and to think about what is that sort of design character and sense of place that's unique to Moab that we want to continue. And there's aspects of that already in different parts of downtown and some selections that we want to build off of. There's some building styles, but I think there's a lot to pull from of what's special about Moab. And so just ideas to begin with, but this is where we really want to hear from you is what do you feel are some of those influences that will help guide us when we select colors, styles? Can we tie into some of your history? Is Moab, or do you want to kind of look forward and sort of technology? Or to me, it's a lot of my experience of Moab is about the larger landscape, and I find the geology and natural setting interesting, but also like that sense of outdoor adventure that you get there that's not found really to the same level in other places. And even the gearhead and mountain biking and climbing kind of aspects of it, I think is something that we can tie in just how we handle some of these details and design choices with these elements. And so if we go into how do you do that, go ahead and do the next slide. Like that can come through in some of the objects. Like we know that bollards are going to be an important part of it. And what a bollard is a little, and you can see example. These are kind of bollards in here, but they're like little posts that just limit vehicle travel because part of this design is limiting where cars can go and not. Like the diagonal parking is not pull through, it's kind of head in and head back out in diagonal ways. So that's going to likely be a big part of the design. But then how we execute those, and there may be some simple, less expensive kind of baseline bollards, but then we have the opportunity to maybe incorporate some more sculptural bollards. David's helping us with some bollards that have lighting. Some of them can be different shapes. So that's another area that we can have some fun with catering that sort of theming and image to match Moab. This example, this bike rack in the kind of middle left is one in Durango, but it's using recycled steel that's from the mining industry and gas and oil pipes. So it's salvaged, it's supporting a local artist. And so things like that could incorporate, as well as using boulders and natural elements is in that too. So, and that light on the bottom was designed with Clanton too as a custom light in Durango, which is relatively inexpensive, but created kind of a nice marker. And we'll get into lighting more, but that's one of the elements that we can meet the goals of lighting and add some visual interest as well. So continuing on. So some of the elements that we have to work with, go ahead into the streetscape planting. Yeah, so we know that we have a few different elements. There's building off of what you already have too, like over by City Hall, we've got the use of crusher fines as a very versatile surfacing outside of the streetscape, which accommodates planting really well and can also be compacted. Boulders are something that we can work with. The bottom images as how the bulb outs may look in plan, if that's something that fits. So one of the things that we know is important to discuss is street trees. So getting into street trees, that's something that can fit in this plan in a couple locations potentially, but it's not currently in the budget. So I wanted to give a little bit of introduction of some of the considerations when looking at street trees and planting. So with trees in Moab, to get a successful street tree really needs irrigation. It's a desert environment. It doesn't get enough natural rain to support a tree. And so that's just a cost that we need to factor into the decision for those trees, and then how they fit within the streetscape. Like in this bottom lower image on the left, that's Fort Collins, where they did clusters of trees. They have a similar situation downtown where they have diagonal parking in the middle of their kind of main street there, and they clustered some trees at the ends of the medians. And so in order to have that kind of function over the long term and have those trees survive, they need adequate space. They need imported proper topsoil. They need drainage and irrigation. And so altogether, for a cost for something like that, in that case, with multiple ornamental trees, that's probably about $8,000 to all inclusive to cover that. And so when you start to multiply that out for this project, we'll have to be selective about where and how that we complete that. On the sides, like street trees would be a little bit easier in cutouts, but they still need to be set up for success with proper soil to the right depth and kind of getting the irrigation that they need. There is the potential to do some non-irrigated xeric planting options, like in planters or other cutouts too. It's a little bit more limited on what will grow in something like that, but there are some plants that can have some decorative value and some perennials and things like that with rock clusters that can be nice. So don't want to exclude that altogether, but just want to be sort of realistic on expectations for planting. And it's also something that we can decide to set up to be able to phase in the future. Okay, and then keep going to the next below on the maintenance. So just thinking ahead to that, whatever we plan for as far as streetscape and planting, we'll need to have budgeted in the ongoing maintenance budget to have staff get out there and take care of it. And so in other similar streetscapes that we've looked at, there's the landscaping costs, and then there's also just kind of hardscape, and that's getting out there, inspecting it, doing any repairs and sealing, touching up paint on furnishings and that kind of thing. With irrigation, you've got to start it up and blow it out every year. So just knowing that the costs associated per block. So that's something that when the city commits to the improvements, that they anticipate those kind of long-term costs going into it. That's it for aesthetics, Cody. You're on mute, Cody.
Sorry. Hey, did you want to talk stormwater treatment at all?
Sure, we can jump over to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Emma Street has this pretty fun opportunity to demonstrate some sustainable practices. So stormwater treatment is just taking the runoff generated by development, in this case by the paved areas, and then slowing down the flood impacts of that on the streams below, and then also filtering out the pollutants that come off of vehicles and the different, one of the most common pollutants is just kind of dust and particulates, but there's also kind of hydrocarbons and other things that come off of vehicles. And so the way we can do that within a sort of publicly maintained project is through series of different targeted basins. So you have a low area like you see on the right. All of those are different types of stormwater treatment basins, and the water is their size that the water sits in those for between a day and 3 days, and then seeps in, infiltrates into the ground. And so you get the benefits of the infiltration, the filtering, And then it also harvests that water, and that can help support some landscaping and be a feature too. They do take some maintenance, and so it's important to plan for them to kind of work well with existing city maintenance practices and not require special equipment. I think that's what's important in a case like Moab, like oversizing them a little bit helps them last longer before they need cleaned out and be more naturalistic. And so like in the upper one is at a library in Durango, where it's just a turf lawn kind of basin, and you can see where the water comes in from the parking lots. There's a similar kind of outlet at the bottom, and then this thing only fills up during major storms, and then slowly drains that water out over a few days. And so they can take different appearances. You can landscape them as kind of rain gardens. The bottom right one is the top forebay that kind of gets the first, collects the sediment, and that's designed that a bobcat can get in there and scoop that out. It's a bunch of consultants standing out there. So we would customize what that is for Emma Street and what we would want that to look like, and then coordinate that with things like community gardens or park features, or whatever the right fit with that adjacent community is. And then this sign in the bottom is just an example of the interpretive aspect, and these really do contribute to habitat. And this is a sign for a different project, but it can kind of educate and demonstrate how the city is taking these steps to improve the environmental quality of these type of projects.
Perfect, Dan. Okay, I think we're right on schedule. So I'd like to turn the time over to David for a minute to talk street lights, talk maybe a little bit about the performance and aesthetics of street lights, dark skies, and then also solar versus traditional.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm happy to be here representing Clanton & Associates. We've worked with Moab before, and we're excited to be included on this project. Thanks for Cody for inviting us. We do appreciate that. There's a lot of facets to lighting, and some of the first things we want to do is find out what our objectives are and what the city needs and what people might be expecting. We very often hear a lot about dark skies. A lot of people have different interpretations of what that might mean and what they expect from it. It's also being superseded a little bit by a new system that we can get into called a bug rating, which stands for backlight, uplight, and glare. Not only does it include uplight, which might pollute the skies with scattered light, but also the glares, the human factor. Do we want glare? Do we want to control glare? How bright do we want things? And backlight, where do we want the light to be? Do we want it to be on our roadways and sidewalks or in our bedroom windows? It's another form of light pollution that's very important. Lighting.
Hey, Cody, if you could advance, there's some slides supporting David on dark sky.
Oh, okay, yeah. I was going through this. This is a bug system. It's fairly new. It was developed by the International Dark Skies Association with the Illuminating Engineering Society, where it breaks the light output of a light fixture into the direction that it's headed to, how much, and that way we can rate a light fixture and compare light fixtures with an actual metric of where the light is going. Dark skies also includes something besides just uplight. There are best practices that we follow and that we recommend. We only want the light on when we need lighting. We might want more light just after dusk than we do in the wee hours of the morning. And we only want it where it's needed. Again, as I just alluded to, on the roadways and sidewalks, or do we want it inside of our bedroom windows at night where it's not appreciated? And we don't need more light than what's needed. Are we reading newspapers outside at night, or are we just trying to get to where we're going? We want to feel safe and secure as we walk along a sidewalk, but we don't need it to be overly bright. We limit the blue sky. We can go on to the next slide too. We limit blue sky lighting or blue wavelength lighting at night, because we're not evolved to have that. That's more of a daytime feel. Lighting does require power, and solar can be a very good way for street lighting, especially with LEDs now, which are low energy and long life, especially when we're off grid or we're out in the middle of somewhere where there's not an existing power source. Downtown in a city, it's sometimes more efficient to use a solar array, such as in this image on the right, which is a shade structure over a sidewalk, solar panels on top. That way we minimize the solar panels. If we put them on each individual pole, it's very redundant with batteries and resources for all that equipment that can be more simple with a larger array. Solar, of course, it doesn't require wiring, and that gives you a little bit of a leeway in the future if things need to be moved or adapted or changed. Moab's great with all the sunlight that's there. It's a great solar opportunity, but it does cost money. Adding solar and battery systems to individual poles, there's lots of options, so that the price range is pretty great, but it adds up really quick. A pole might cost $1,000, but to get solar onto it might triple or quadruple the cost pretty easily. The controls where we might want to do something get a little more complicated because we have all that other equipment. And it's a fairly large thing. They work better on a street type Cobra head fixture on a 30-foot pole. Smaller poles that are at a pedestrian scale at like 15 feet with a nice looking fixture on it doesn't really lend itself necessarily all that well to a solar panel being intruded to it. And it also increases the wind load. Wind load is very important on sizing of a pole. And so we need much sturdier equipment. They could be larger and with bigger foundations, also driving up the costs a little bit. Next slide, Cody.
Yep.
Some of what we want to determine with the community is styles, what we want the fixtures to look like. Do we want to match some of the existing equipment, or do we want all new equipment? And what does it look like? Is it decorative, or is it fairly diminutive, or is it a little bit more modern looking, such as some of these are? Here we have a combination of not dark sky in the upper left corner, where we have lenses hanging down, and those luminaires might emit light up into the night sky, giving us some sky glow, whereas the lower right hand is dark sky. It does not put any light up. They're all fairly, we call this transitional. It's kind of a change from a traditional to a more modern fixture, but it's still got some of those elements of historic fixtures, such as finials and ribs. There's also, we're going to consider the family that we're looking at. We're going to have bollards. We're going to have pedestrian scale poles. What do they do? Are they actually working like in the middle of the median diagonal parking to control traffic? Or are they more decorative? There's lots of materials, and there's all kinds of finishes and styles that we can work with. So overall, lighting is going to be very important. And so our first goal is to find out what the city wants and how we can achieve that, along with, the lighting levels, how bright or how dark. Let's control pollution. Let's keep glare down so it's a comfortable. People feel safe walking around in the downtown area as well as driving.
Perfect.
Cody?
Yeah, I think that's good, David. Appreciate it. And just off to the side there, you see some of the pictures we've taken or shots we've seen of fixtures there in Moab. So obviously in Moab, you do have different fixtures throughout town. So that's something to consider. All right. Thanks, David. I'd like to turn the time over to Leah now. and she's going to talk just a little bit about public involvement through this project.
Hello, thanks for having me. I'm really pleased to be here. I have not had the privilege of working in Moab before during public engagement, but I have worked in other, I guess, small outdoor recreation towns like it. So I'm pleased to be here, and obviously have been to Moab many times as a native Utahn. So I'm excited to be here. Our public process that we're scoped for includes 2 of these sort of internal council meetings, as well as 2 public open house meetings. If you'll advance the slide, Cody, I have some goals, and I'm very interested in hearing sort of what council's recommendations are for public involvement goals as well. We really want to make sure that the public has the opportunity to participate in decisions that are made as part of this project. Oops.
Sorry.
It's okay. I want to make sure that as decisions are being made, we're sharing that with Moab, and making sure that where there are opportunities for the public to get engaged, we give them those opportunities. I also want to make sure that we know, the public knows what the decision-making framework is, what the opportunities are, and what the limitations are, right? We know, and David both talked about some really great and exciting aesthetic treatments and opportunities that we might have. And, you know, Cody and Chuck are going to keep us in line with our budgets, and trying to make sure that all of those pieces are aligned, and that we get the right expectations out, and people understand the rationale behind whatever those decisions are, is really my job. So I'm here to help with that. Cody, if you'll go to the next slide.
Okay.
We'll talk a little bit about some of the ways we plan to do that. Again, getting guidance from council tonight is the most critical, and we hope to come back again and do that a bit later on as we have a little more design work. We'll obviously be utilizing the communication channels that the city is already implementing, including the website and social media. We'll also send out informational email updates as we move through the project. We will go out and speak with area businesses and property owners one-on-one to make sure that we understand their concerns and get their input about how these parking recommendations and changes could affect them, and also how we can, you know, make sure that we're not negatively impacting business operations while we're designing those things. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have a couple of public meetings to make sure that people get to weigh in and talk with the team and ask questions and share their thoughts.
Perfect.
And if there are other ways that you all think that we should be sharing that information, I absolutely want to learn about that today. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Leah. And lastly, I think the last thing I kind of want to just touch base before we kind of open it up for discussion is talk about construction, project costs, and time frame. So meeting with Chuck and talking through this project, we feel like we can have design completed this fall of this year and start construction on these improvements. In talking with Chuck, I think there's an opportunity to start construction in certain areas, to even start earlier. So it just depends. Maybe we've got 9 streets that are downtown, but we may be able to start kind of up on the Emma Boulevard area before that to satisfy the terms of the UDOT agreement too. Like, we want to get started work as soon as possible on this. So I think there's opportunity there. I think it's important as we work through the design, we understand how they will build the project, the sequencing, which means, you know, we don't want them tearing up every road in Moab all at once. You know, we're going to require the contractor have a sequence before he moves on to another location. He's going to have to tidy up the location he's working on and open it up for public use. So that's something to think about as we move forward. Also, you know, Leah hit it on the money. We got to, everything we do has got to be within a budget, right? And you can see off there to the left, that's the current cost estimate for some of the items, keeping in mind that we only have an allocated budget for aesthetics that Chuck talked about at the first. And then just some other considerations, you know, we're living in a different time that it's hard to get material for construction projects right now. Timelines are way longer than they used to be. And we've got to consider that when we put this project out to bid and ultimately construct it. So those are things to consider as well. Chuck, maybe I'll turn the time back to you. And I think that was pretty much everything we had for as far as a presentation for council.
Yeah, thank you all very much for that. Mayor and council, that's kind of where we're at now and where we think we're going based upon the agreements with UDOT and the past history and working with council. And I'd love to hear from you, see if we can help answer any questions that you have. I know it's a lot of information tonight. So Mayor, I'd like to turn it back to you and council to ask us questions or give us your thoughts if you don't have questions. Correct?
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. And can we turn off the shared screen so we can see everybody?
Yep.
Thank you. Nice presentation. That's very good for those of us that aren't aware of what the plans are. And so I would just like to open it up to council for questions for Chuck or the consultants here. I know you guys have something to say. I will just, for David's purposes on the lighting and the dark skies, the city does have a dark sky ordinance. So
Yes.
I think it'd be great if you guys just look into that and, you know, follow it. So, I mean, that's something we're trying to do anyway with all of our lighting. And so that, I think that would be a good guide for you in the dark sky process for lighting.
We'll certainly do that. Thank you.
You bet. Okay, Jason.
I'll go. So I had one question. I was looking at on one of the streets that you showed, is one by the Greenwell, putting in those streets there. My one question about this whole thing is, and it's with the parking spots, is a lot of these streets are heavy in the spring and fall with truck and trailer parking. Is there a thought or what will happen to those vehicles and where they will go and park within the city limits?
Yeah, good question, Jason. We've been talking about that for the last 5 years too, as part of this, just so you know, the hotspot funding, the oversized vehicle. And in fact, we had proposals which would have created parking lots on either end of town as a place with a potential shuttle system. To be quite honest with you, the median parking is not RV friendly because what you end up with is one-way streets where that median parking is in place. So if you were to pull through, you just can't make that turn because of the acute angle there, right, for the RV parking. Some of the parallel parking would still be available for oversized vehicles, as well as over in the Emma area, there are some of those parallel parking spots as well. So the median parking in and of itself doesn't solve that issue. Some of the parallel parking, it will still be compatible to like using 2 spaces, if you will, when you can find it. But the parking stalls that UDOT wanted us to consider were the standard size vehicle parking stalls.
So those ones that are in the median, they're not going to be separated by a parking block or something in the middle of them. They'll be pulled through, or will they have parking blocks?
I'm sorry, they will be separated that by bollards or some treatment. So you cannot pull through because you can't pull through. Let's say you're on Center Street. Yeah, because it's too hard of an angle to turn your rig. Right. So, we're going to have to do some signage and some education as part of this project about that. I identifying that we're well aware it's a need, and we've tried to work it in where we could, but the median parking in and of itself doesn't create any new oversized vehicle opportunities. potentially some of the parallel parking does.
All right. No, and then I like going to I like the night sky street lights. I think that's pretty key. I would love to see solar panels, but I think the cost is just so out there that it wouldn't make sense. But in a way, I think, don't we have a goal to the whole city's solar by a certain time? So in a way, we're kind of solar powered, even though they don't have solar panels on them, So I think we're still reaching that goal of, that. So no, I think it looks like a great project. The only other, Emma Boulevard, I think would be a great area to be first. I know that a lot of those businesses that are on Main Street right there are frustrated with the Main Street widening. They lost parking where they were usually parking, in front of
Right.
those shops that are there, and that they lost parking or perceived to have lost parking. And so I think that, getting that taken care of is pretty important.
Okay. Yeah, and we think that one has less impacts on downtown, with all of that all at once. So I think we could see some benefit in a shorter amount of time on Emma. So, okay, thank you. Understood.
That's all I
Chuck, I
have.
don't know if this is a question for you or for one of the consultants, but what is the surface material that they'll be using on these, on the median parking, and how does it compare in cost to, just crack sealing or striping asphalt?
So I'll take a shot at that, Tawny. So we put together in our cost estimates, I don't know if you recall, we did a paving option with asphalt. We did a regular concrete treatment, which would, kind of demarcate those median parking stalls. And then we also looked at stamped concrete. And we looked at the costs and both of capital costs and maintenance costs. And UDOT came back and said they would only approve the pavement costs because they considered concrete and stamped concrete to be outside of the need. So if the city wanted to pick up those additional costs, we certainly could do so, but we'd have to have the money to do so out of our own funds or from somewhere. So currently, it'll be paving, even though we're looking at see if we can come up with some colored paving or some reflective paving, some things like that, which we'd have to get approval from both before we brought it to council. We want to make sure that UDOT was going to pay for that. But the reason chip sealing and that would, if we do paving, it'll be in our normal cycle of trying to chip seal roads every 7 years, 5 to 7 years, and crack sealing and such, and then with a life cycle cost of probably 25 years for paving. What we're trying not to do, and Cody was trying to point it out in that Google Earth photo, is, and a lot of those downtown streets are so crack sealed and chip sealed that I kind of worry about putting 4 inches of brand new asphalt just in the parking places, and we leave the travel lanes in a condition they're at now. I think that's I'm not sure it looked that good, and I'm not sure it's a good message. But we're going to be evaluating all those costs.
Okay, thank you.
Connie, I would add to that, that's something we've looked at in different projects too, and we can get into that with the design, where, like, I think in my big picture takeaway and working on other projects is that the pavement is not the greatest place to spend your precious aesthetic budget, because a lot of the colored kind of solutions, when they're driven over kind of day to day, they get kind of marked up by tires and stuff and blend in with the asphalt over time anyway. And so I think we can look at that, and then I think there might be some little accent striping or something like that that could give it some interest. But then, like, generally speaking, and try to get more bang for the buck with the more vertical elements. But that's really preliminary, and we can get into that later.
Okay, that's good to know.
Ronnie.
I can make some comments. So I think you'll get a lot of comments from our community when you meet with them because they have a lot of good ideas. But one important thing to understand about Moab is that we're a community of a lot of artists. And so aesthetics will matter, and probably things that would be popular elsewhere are not going to be popular here. I imagine you might find more support, for example, for bollards that are sandstone or something local as opposed to something ornate and I don't know, that looks a little bit more East Coasty or so I think people will have impacts on that, but I think definitely sticking to something more natural and local, it will be appreciated also on the from a carbon footprint standpoint, and just some other general observations. We definitely have sustainability goals as a community, and I would think that anything we're trying to do here should keep in mind climate change and resiliency and what we can be doing to maximize kind of lifespan of materials, but also prepare for the fact that, you know, we have changing weather events and we do have a lot of stormwater, and keeping all of those things in mind. I would hope that the community involvement would really tap into a lot of the expertise we have in our community. We have incredible expertise in terms of landscaping, xeriscaping, whether you're talking about USU, Moab's extension, and all of the gardens they've done, the curb cuts they've done to integrate water that's naturally on the landscape. So that might be one way to cut out some irrigation costs by working with them. You know, they're also tied to the Bee Inspired Gardens, but we also have a lot of people here who work with native plants and landscaping. So I think things like ornamental trees would not be popular. We have a list of species that do well here that we should be sticking with and using those resources, and whether it's you know, trees or other forbs or grasses. And I'm sure the community will have a lot of ideas about, you know, you're interested in about potentially cultural or history issues. I mean, there's a lot of different history over time here. So I would just hope that if one was making a nod to one point in history, one go back also to kind of First Nations. And so what else? It would be helpful probably for all of us, the community and the council, as we look at options for things like lighting or landscaping, to have some cost comparisons, because I know there definitely is an interest in solar lighting. So if somebody can show us a side-by-side comparison, you know, that makes it easier for us to say, okay, it's totally out of the question, or maybe over time there would be a return on investment. Shade and vegetation has been a big concern from the beginning. I mean, I think the council members who voted or showed support for moving forward with this were never interested or willing to do it if we just ended up with median parking that was just going to be a heat island, you know, or contribute to heat island effect. So that's a really big concern. I've had some residents write me in the past week, so I'll just pass these on, things to think about. Are real concerns about bicycle safety, especially with the medians and cars on both sides now. So in the community meetings, I think it's really important to be reaching out ahead of time to have the involvement of our different bicycle shops, but then also organizations like Trail Mix that think a lot about bicycle patterns, adaptive transportation, and also those people, there are some experts at the county who've worked on adaptive transportation a lot. There are some concerns, and more for just colleagues at the city to know that we need to think about community concerns about how we're planning to deal with enforcement. Like if we end up with vehicles that are too long for a given space, trying to park in some of these spots, how we're planning to address that. Just added concern for pedestrians and cyclists there, but also other drivers. And there has been some discussion over the years about an interest in trying out, just from a safety standpoint, some of you guys have probably seen them, I don't know what the name is for them in different communities, but you see them in Colorado and some other communities, flashing lights when a pedestrian wants to cross that are kind of at eye level. And I don't know in the planning for this, if it's possible to pre-plan if one ever wanted to add that. We know I don't know that UDOT's interested in any of that, but it's definitely, we have enough busy side streets that might be something that the city wants to pilot at some point at some of these intersections. And so it's been discussed on and off at some meetings, but so any infrastructure that's involved with those that could be put in place at the same time everything else is being ripped up. It'd be great if somebody could contemplate that. And then just to underscore what Joette said about dark skies, I mean, our ordinance was done with the county and is pretty darn detailed. And so a lot of those questions about where do we want the light to be, that's all been thought out, discussed. I think our community has a pretty good understanding. So again, yeah, please just go to the ordinance and I'll let mother.
Okay, Luke, you haven't made any comments yet. Do you have some comments you'd like to make? I think you're muted.
Yeah, I am.
There
Thanks.
you go. Mhm.
Yeah, firstly, I apologize for running late. The building codes public meeting ran late, and as soon as I realized that it was late, my dog started throwing up all over the house. So it was a bit of a chaotic mess around here. I did catch a lot of things. I agree a lot with what Jason said in regards to kind of focusing on dark sky compliance. I think solar would be a great option, but with limited budget, I don't know how feasible of an option it would be. And then kind of echoing what Ronnie was talking about is I do know that there is a pretty prevalent kind of belief or desire within the community to not turn Moab into another one of those kind of like really high-end resort towns or anything like that, and to keep some of Moab's character. And so some of the eclectic nature and kind of like the eclectic population that we have to have the community kind of reflect the community, I guess. But yeah, I do appreciate a lot of kind of like the xeriscaping and really being thoughtful with making sure that we kind of do some of the flood management and some of that stuff in an aesthetically pleasing way. But other than that, I don't know that I have too much more to add.
Okay. Any other comments, questions from the council at this point? Tawny?
Yeah. Just as I was sitting here listening to Luke and thinking about who in our community to involve, this might be a good opportunity, since we've got a little bit of lead time, to reach out to the arts trails people that have a they display the sculptures every year, and then the community picks one. Maybe we could get them involved and see if they could have a, this year or next year, they design the bollards and the city picks the bollards, or some lighting fixtures or something along those lines, and involve people in the community, the artisans that don't always comment at public meetings or don't always come to city council meetings, but there are different ways to involve other people in the community rather than just the council making decisions.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to note too that on a streetscape we worked on in Ridgeway, we ended up doing a call to artists for a number of the furnishings. And so there was like benches, some lighting, and some signage, and then just some sort of vertical markers kind of and some other streetscape elements. But so they ended up doing this kind of broad call to artists, and then had a sort of task force that helped make the final selections. And like Rainey was saying, it kept the work more local. It was more kind of tied to the community as far as materials and styles. And it was really unique. Like one of the craziest things that came out of that is these benches that were made out of old cut up propane tanks and then powder coated. And they have this like very contemporary modern look, but very funky and unique, and that was Ridgeway's way of kind of expressing some of their, unique eclectic quality there. So I think we could look at an approach kind of like that potentially here too, and working, you keep the budget kind of really clear with those, but get some great variety. So I'll bring that to a future meeting.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I think that's a really good opportunity for a future meeting once we're able to sort of cost out what fits within that 6% from UDOT versus what our overall vision might be. Because if you looked at that original costing, the 6% is still not very much.
Right, but we also want to.
So I think that's a great opportunity. I think that the point being that I think it's a great opportunity for the community to rally around something that they might end up funding, right?
Yep, and we want to keep in mind selections within the existing budget, so there's budget for like lighting, but we still have to make decisions on what that is. And I want this council to kind of input too, and maybe not today, but in the process on kind of the importance of consistency with existing kind of features and streetscape that have been started. So how much would you like this to kind of carry forward some of those things that have already started? Like we showed the lights that are downtown now. Do you want to continue some of those themes? So something we'd like your feedback on.
So just in terms of the artists, the idea, and that you mentioned about the artists, I think that's great. One of the things to think about though is if you go around town, they do their own art. And so perhaps it's not something where you guys pay for it, but we just have a display where they can change out their art on an annual basis. So it's not something that UDOT may pay for, but it's something that they can do on an annual basis on their own, so that they can display their art.
Like you create the place for it, and then you have rotating art in there, and then they can have it kind of tied to the city to promote their work. Okay.
Yeah, they do that in St. George City, and they rotate the art pieces. They have it in roundabouts, and they just rotate them. And when someone buys them, they get a new art piece. So,
right.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot. We just make the space big enough to display it.
Mm-hmm. And, I guess that brings me to, are you guys going to have stakeholders? I noticed, Leah, that you had stakeholders on your list of public engagement, and it was kind of next to town halls, but Ronnie's idea, there's a lot of people that would have a lot of input. And I think if you are planning on stakeholders, we can help determine who those folks are to participate in that conversation. I think they would have a lot better feedback, I know, than I would, because I'm not, this is kind of like out of my thing. But if you are doing that, I think that'd be great. We can help you identify the people to participate in that group.
Yes, we'd absolutely love any input on people that you think need to be involved. We'll, of course, rely on Chuck to give us some of that input, and we'll also be talking directly to the people who are most adjacent and then putting things out broadly. So that does get most of the folks that are immediately adjacent, but like you said, or Tommy maybe said, not everyone comes to council meetings. Not everyone reads the newsletters. We kind of have to hit a variety of sources. So any groups that you think are important that we talk to, we're happy to hear about.
Great. That sounds great. And I guess in terms of public meetings, that's going to be really important. People are not going to be happy with the disruption. So not only engaging the public on what we're doing and trying to get them excited about it and to think beyond the bad times that we're going to have before we get there. I think that's going to be a really key thing, because people are not going to be happy, with the disruptions that we're going to see. And I like your idea of including the businesses in that, because businesses may have some impacts, and they're, we want to make sure that visitors have access to those businesses. So that's a great way to engage them and get them excited about the future of what the outcome of this project is going to be. And then one other thing I think that you guys brought up is and I believe, Ann, you brought this up with the long-term maintenance costs. And I think the minimum amount of long-term maintenance costs we can have, the better, because we have a hard time even managing the streets that we have right now. And so whatever we come up with, I think that needs to be a really important consideration as to what time constraints is going to put on our staff and the cost.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll keep that in mind and try to avoid the things that sort of drive cost up are things that kind of require more hand labor or like a specialized piece of equipment or, sizing things, like even just making sure when you do the walkways that it's got a, it can be plowed more easily without having to get around a lot of tricky little areas and things like that. So clearances for equipment and things like that. So we'll pay attention to that and kind of keep that maintenance cost kind of along with the other costs so that it's clear.
Great, good. And I did notice in the budget that there's like probably a large portion of the budget, I might have seen this wrong, goes to lighting. So we need to really be cautious about using our ordinances and doing what we can to make sure we protect our skies at the same time keeping our visitors safe. So anyway, that was an interesting thing to see. I'm glad to see that. That was good.
Mayor, can
Yes.
I address that real quick? The reason for that is that, I just want to make sure that everyone understands, because we talked about this during the concept design. It was at length, multiple meetings. These designs don't have crosswalks in between the intersections.
Mm-hmm.
That's because in Utah, there's no jaywalking except between signalized intersections. So potentially people get out of the median and walk directly behind their car to cross the travel lane to get to the sidewalks, or vice versa, between the sidewalks to get out to their car. And that's going to happen at night as well as during the daytime, as we all know who live here, that we get night. In fact, our studies show dinner hour is the biggest time downtown of any. So we sized the lighting and the lighting spacing based upon some work that Clanton had done for us earlier on the highway. And so it is a large number, and UDOT wanted to carve that number up, but they couldn't, because we realize that lighting is something that we have to do for public safety, because these facilities will be used at night. So yes, Clanton, David knows about their dark sky ordinance and is well aware, and we'll keep that in mind. But lighting is a key component of this from a public safety standpoint. We've spent lots of time talking about it. Just want to bring you up to speed on that. Yeah.
That's great. And I think we could maybe use the lighting budget in kind of an aesthetic way. And so, even though we have such a limited time amount of money for aesthetics, if we be really creative with our lighting, that also creates a safe environment for people downtown, to win-win. So
That's why we're here, Mayor.
Yep, good. So Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, so on the one it showed the budget, and if we get to the point where we start bidding this out and we go over budget, is there an area that we're cutting, or are we pretty confident that we can do everything we want within this budget 9 months from now?
Well, Jason, that's a good question. Chuck might answer this. I'm 80% sure we can do it. We always have contingencies, right, in construction, and man, the way cost is going right now, who knows in 6 months. So
it's a pretty significant contingency that was built into that model.
yes.
Saw that.
Yeah, we have a large contingency. And the other thing is, what UDOT's really concerned about in the Transportation Commission was number of stalls. And those number of stalls translate, if we do the math, and they're realistic enough that I think if there's good documentable reasons, such as these increased costs, that mean we have to get a few less stalls in order to meet our budget, I think they'll be open to that discussion. But I think because they're aware of how the costs have increased. So it's a good question. We're just going to monitor it as we go through this, and we'll keep everyone posted.
think the important thing is document that along the way so you can tell the story to UDOT down the road if something does come about.
Okay,
What was that price? $40,000 a stall or something like that?
42,000.
Oh. Yeah.
never thought parking could be so expensive.
I also had a question that financial model indicated 144 stalls and the contract with UDOT indicated 188.
Right.
You have to add the 44 from Emma.
Mhm.
If you take the 188 and, or take the 144 and add the 44 from Emma, it gives you the 188. And that's a separate sheet there, Ben.
Yeah, I think I showed you just the sheet for the 9 streets and not the Emma portion.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the council? I guess I just need to ask then, where do we go from here, Cody? What are our next steps?
So, like I said, we've had our survey crews out there. We've got the base mapping complete. What we want to do now is probably start 30% design, what we call 30% design. So now we've got some input from you guys. We want to get the layout of these parking areas, curb, gutter, get that kind of laid out and come back to you and work through, you know, some of these issues we talked about today. You know, what do we want to try to do here, and get that in a position where we feel good presenting that in a public meeting.
Okay. So council, I would encourage you to think of folks in the community that would want to participate in a stakeholder group and maybe get that list of names to Chuck. And then we can work with Leah on that piece. But otherwise, if there's not any other questions, staff, do you have any questions?
No, thank you for your time. And any further thoughts you have, please let us know.
Great. Thank you guys so much for taking the time. This has been very informative. I'm looking forward to this being done. I think it's going to really be nice for our downtown. I think it'll really be a nice benefit. So a lot of work to do, but thank you and look forward to working with you all again in the future. And I guess I just call for a motion to adjourn this special workshop. Do I have to do that, Summer? Is that part of this?
Typically, we do a motion and a second, and then you
Okay.
call for a vote.
All right.
Mayor, I can move to adjourn.
All right, Ronnie, seconded by Tawny. All right. You guys, thank you. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you all. Thanks.